When it comes to your child's health,
you want care that's close, convenient,
and centered around the needs of your family.
At MMC Pediatrics, we're more than just doctors.
We're partners in your parenting journey.
Here for every growth spurt,
for every boo-boo,
every fever, and every flu.
Our team approach means that your child always sees someone that knows them.
We are MMC Pediatrics.
We are right beside you
every step of the way.
Murfreesboro, FM 100.5 Smyrna, audio and video streaming at WGNSradio.com. This is The Roundtable, Tennessee Association of Broadcasters Award winner for Best Local Talk Show. A look at the news, views, politics, sports, and people shaping Rutherford County.
Welcome into The Roundtable on this Wednesday. Chip Walters with you from Exit Realty, Bob Lamb & Associates, and the Blue Raider Network. And the countdown is on to America's 250th birthday, and we have a very, very special presentation today. Dr. John Weil, who is a political science professor and the dean of the Buchanan Honors College at MTSU, is with us, and he is an expert on the Declaration of Independence, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to turn back the clock today and 250 years and talk about the Declaration, how it all went down, and how we're still tied to it today. And Dr. Weil, it's so good to see you. I had reached out to you earlier, but I'm glad it kind of worked out when it did, because this is the perfect time to be talking to you.
It's a pleasure to be here. You know, by some calendars, if John Adams had been right, we would be celebrating on July 2nd rather than July 4th.
Gotcha.
Because the 2nd is the day that we actually, or the Second Continental Congress actually voted on the resolution for independence. So he writes this letter home to Abigail, and he says, this is the day we're going to celebrate from now and henceforth. We're going to have bonfires and fireworks and sporting events. And it turns out when they adopt the official explanation on the 4th, that becomes Independence Day instead of July 2nd.
Yeah, it's interesting that we celebrate our independence on from 1776, although the Constitution wasn't ratified
11 years later.
11 years later. But
yes.
You have, if I read correctly, you have written or edited about 53 different books, and one sitting in front of us is entitled The Declaration of Independence, which is basically a one-page document, and you've got about a 300-page book there. And you had another one about the signers of the...
I do. There was one of the delegates, Dr. Benjamin Rush,
yes,
who was a physician, wrote sort of a diary with little biographies of the people that he had met there. And I did a book on his analysis of each of them and how they're still regarded today.
That's interesting. And you know, there's how many? 56 signers?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
56 signers of the Declaration of Independence, ranging from Georgia all the way to the New England area. And, you know, to me, when they got the Second Continental Congress together, you know, right today, you know, we send out a Zoom meeting request. How did they get them all together at the right time back then?
Well, actually, in terms of the signing, they weren't all there together.
Okay.
That's one of the misconceptions that we have. There's a famous painting by Trumbull, which is in huge painting in the Capitol building, one of like 4 that the Congress commissioned. And one of them has the delegates sort of coming one by one to sign. But what actually happened is the vote was taken on July 4th, so it was printed later that night in regular print, and there were only 2 names on it, John Hancock, who was the president, and then a guy named Thompson, who was the secretary. And it stayed that way. Then later in July about 19th, if I remember, they asked that the document be engrossed, which means put into script. So you'll see 2 different versions of the Declaration, one in the type and the other in the script. That wasn't finished until about August 2nd. It was brought to the convention or to the Congress, And then people, as they were there, and some people who signed it hadn't actually voted for it because they had subsequently been elected, and some people who voted for it had subsequently left. But we believe that the signing took place between like August 2nd and into at least January of 1777.
Oh, wow.
And it wasn't until January.
It wasn't like they were all there and let's line up and sign.
Well, those who were there on the day that it was there signed, but not everybody was there. And the names were not actually published until January of 1777. And, one of the things we sometimes forget is that when you sign the Declaration of Independence, that was an act, would have been considered an act of treason. And so there was some wisdom in not immediately printing the names of everybody there. Hancock was president and the secretary, they were already well known, but the others, their names come later.
Yeah, as they came to the conclusion that they needed to do something. I mean, there had been the First Continental Congress, and things were brewing. What was the atmosphere politically like leading up to, and I was reading the other day where, finally Thomas Jefferson and the other members of the group of five actually got together to write it between June the 11th and the 28th.
Yes.
And, but for them to what, obviously it was a politically charged time of right then. What was the atmosphere like?
Well, one of the stories, and I'll come back a little bit, but one of the stories that's told is that during the signing or thereafter, during part of the signing, or probably after the vote was taken, but Benjamin Franklin allegedly said, we either hang together or we hang separately. And there was a little bit of gallows humor. Benjamin Harrison, I don't know which, there were about 10, 1, 2, 3 on, but Harrison was this big guy, and so he started joking with Elbridge Gerry, who was a scrawny little delegate, that, he was going to have it easy because his neck would be broken and he would die immediately, and Gerry would be up jumping around. But, I usually trace, to understand the Declaration, one of the fascinating things about it is the part we don't read. We typically read the first paragraph, which is sort of the philosophy, and then we read the last paragraph, which is, mutual dedication to the common cause. In between,
and those are the really beautifully written parts of it.
It's almost poetry. Mr. Jefferson had a reputation. He had written a book called The Some Review of British Americans, and he had a reputation for good writing, although, to be careful, about a third of his declaration was rewritten or deleted. That was done in debates at the Continental Congress, and he hated it. He had very thin skin. Benjamin Franklin had to come over and sort of hold his hand through the process and say, no, it's gonna be okay. They still have the majority. But I usually date, we need to remember fighting had actually broken out over a year before. Lexington Concord, or in April of 1775. And what happened is the colonists, ever since the end of the French and Indian War, when Britain had begun enacting taxes, the colonists had been resisting Parliament this whole time. No taxation without representation, which they had taken from the Magna Carta. But initially they tried to say, but we're still loyal to England because the king gave us our charters and he's going to intercede on our behalf. And when he rejects the so-called olive branch petition, the colonists realize, no, if you want to stand up for your rights, you're going to have to do it. So if you look at the Declaration of Independence, the charges are directed not against Parliament, who they have not recognized from the start, but they're directed against the king. So most of the accusations begin with he has.
Yeah.
And the he is George III. And what's interesting, there's a new book about this
Yeah, he has refused
Yes.
his assent to laws, the most
Yes.
wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden the governors to pass laws of
Yes.
and so on and so on. That's the part where I like to call the airing of grievances. That would have been from the Seinfeld episode.
Yes. Well, and what it's actually like is it's very similar to a legal brief.
Yeah.
Not surprising. Mr. Jefferson was a lawyer.
Yeah.
And so you're building your case, and of course, more important than the individual accusations are that they're lined up in such a way to show that the king is exercising tyrannical power, and that his desire, these taxes and the other measures that he is approving are just the opening step for him to take further and further control.
Was it at that point? Was it, as more and more things were coming from the king, was it inevitable that something was going to happen?
Well, I mean, you had sort of three groups leading up to the adoption of the Declaration. And one group is, your John Adams, particularly Samuel Adams. We should have done this a long time ago. And January of 1776, Thomas Paine, who's a recent immigrant, writes a book called Common Sense, in which he basically, remember, the original attachment is to the king, and he comes along and says, well, kings tend to be tyrants, they lead to war and oppression, and hereditary succession is silly. Why should you choose somebody on the basis that they're the son of someone else? And then finally, why are we allowing this small island to be governing a continent? It just doesn't make sense. So you have some who are, chomping at the bit. You have others who are very reluctant.
Right.
And then you have sort of people in between who say, well, we're willing to, and John Dickinson might be a good example of this. He actually argued against independence, but when it came, then he did support the cause. So they sometimes say, a third, and a third in terms of patriot, Tory, undecided. I think there were probably more patriots than a third, but there were many communities where, Tories predominated and
were loyal to the king.
They were, and the lone book that I know of during this period that's actually written by somebody on the, not by a general, but like by a private, basically delineates how awful it was to be fighting in states where you didn't know who was on your side and who wasn't.
Boy, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And kind of talk about where Tennessee was at that time.
Okay.
And also, did the delegates and the members of the Continental Congress in 1776, while they said, that there's an island who is governing us and we have this whole continent, but did they actually know what they had at that point?
Well, no, I don't think they had yet. Well, Francis Drake had been to California, or was present-day California. I'm not sure the delegates knew that, but one of the charges against the king was that he had forbidden expansion. They had signed treaties with the Native Americans, which basically tried to stop immigration at the Appalachian Mountains. And of course, it went largely unheeded. But so people in Tennessee, and actually there wasn't a Tennessee, of course, it was part of North Carolina at the time, but they were primarily interested in expansion and in protection against Native Americans.
Those were the two big threats at that point. And
yes,
and it was obviously at that point in this part of the world, it was 100% agricultural.
Yes. Well, some commerce in terms of, Mississippi River, although most were in East Tennessee at the time. Dr. Lynn Nelson, by the way, just gave a talk on this in Cannonsburg the other day. We're having a series of lectures Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of this week, and he gave a lecture on Monday on Tennessee and what its motivations were. And many Tennesseans joined the Overmountain group to fight the Battle of Kings Mountain, which in turn led to Cornwallis's retreat into Yorktown, where he was, of course, surrounded by the the French fleet as well as the Americans.
So that was one of the keys to the end of the war.
It was, yes.
Yeah. But it's kind of I'll tell you one of the things that you mentioned that, as just a normal person who has learned what we've learned is I didn't really, the juxtaposition that there had already been skirmishes, Concord and Trenton, well over a year before this happened, and then you throw in the Boston Tea Party, and it seemed like it was all
well, of course that was before either of those, but
right.
Yeah, I mean, from the end of the French and Indian War, about 1763 to 1776, you have tax after tax and refusal, boycotts, refusal to pay the tax, actually in some cases burning down or looting the houses of royal governors and lieutenant governors.
Oh, wow.
So there's quite a bit of conflict before that.
Yeah, and there was, right now Netflix has several documentaries on several of the founders. There's one on young Washington coming up. There's a movie.
Yes, July 4th, I believe.
Coming out. And but there's one on Thomas Jefferson, and
yes,
it's a multi-part, and it's really interesting on how he grew up, and when you think about it here, I think about just the first, in that first line where we talk about all men being created equal, and the ones who were writing this were typically, there were a lot of them were slave owners.
Yes,
there's a dichotomy there.
There is, and I'm not sure that anybody fully has understood how to cope with this, other than to say the document had a highly aspirational quality to it.
And it was almost a perfect document by imperfect men.
Yes. Good way of describing it.
So, all right, Dr. John Vial is our guest today. We're talking about the Declaration of Independence as we celebrate America's 250th birthday. If you've got questions, text them in, 615-893-1450. We'll have more with Dr. Vial right after this on WGNS.
When it comes to your child's health,
You want care that's close, convenient.
And centered around the needs of your family.
At MMC Pediatrics, we're more than just doctors.
We're partners in your parenting journey.
Here for every growth spurt,
for every boo-boo,
every fever, and every flu.
Our team approach means that your child always sees someone that knows them.
We are MMC Pediatrics.
We are right beside you.
Every step of the way.
I'll be right there.
It takes all of us to power a community, both in plain sight and behind the scenes. Middle Tennessee Electric, bringing good energy.
School's out Murfreesboro, but learning doesn't stop at Learning Zone. All summer, kids grow with hands-on fun that keeps young minds sharp. Here's the big news. Our summer special gives new families our best summer promotional rates. Enroll in the next 30 days to take advantage. Miss the window, and it's gone. Trusted care, amazing teachers, unbeatable rates. Call Learning Zone at 615-695-1667. That's 615-695-1667.
34 years. That's how long Marsha Blackburn has been in politics. She ran for Congress, State Senate, Congress 8 more times, U.S. Senate twice. I voted for her, and I bet you did too. Now Marsha Blackburn wants to end her career as governor. We all owe Marsha our sincere thanks for her service, but we don't owe her the governor's office.
John Rose.
It's not a reward, it's a tough job for a tough, conservative CEO. I'm John Rose. Like President Trump and previous Tennessee governors, I'm a CEO. I grew 2 great technology companies. I created jobs. I made a payroll and made tough decisions. To To run our state, we need someone who's run a business, not just someone who's run for office. I'm John Rose, and I'm applying to do the job.
For Governor, John Rose. Keep Tennessee, Tennessee. Paid for by Rose for Tennessee. Jeff Aiken, Treasurer.
This is Good Neighbor Events with Bart Walker. Brought to you by AmeriCare Pest Control and the law offices of John Day.
This is a paid legal ad.
At the law offices of John Day, we take only real cases that make a real difference.
The law offices of John Day took the burden really off of my shoulders.
So if you think you're going to get rich quick with a frivolous case, I'm not the lawyer for you.
I want you to know that I appreciate everything you have done so much. I know you went over and beyond.
If we're not able to help or aren't the right lawyer for you, we'll do the best to point you in the right direction. If you've been injured, call the law offices of John Day for a free consultation.
Now, Good Neighbor Events. Here's Bart Walker.
This is our Independence Day week. And for those of you here in Rutherford County, you don't have to drive out of town to enjoy the 4th of July. If you live in Smyrna, the fireworks display is this Thursday night, July 2nd, 5 o'clock. And that's over at the Lee Victory Recreation Park. The fireworks begin at dark in Smyrna. That's this Thursday. Then on the 4th of July, Saturday, the oldest Independence Day celebration in Rutherford County is in Rockvale. It's 98 years old this year. It continues at the Rockvale Community Center. Step back in time and enjoy an old-fashioned style picnic with barbecue, hamburgers, homemade ice cream, and famous local fried pies. Plus family-oriented hay rides, youth softball, and cornhole tournaments. The admission is free. That's 10 a.m. through the afternoon on Saturday, the 4th of July. In Laverne, it's at 5:30 at the Veterans Memorial Park. Details in a moment on Celebration Under the Stars. That's Saturday in Murfreesboro.
Rutherford weather.
Mainly sunny today with daytime highs approaching 100. Mainly clear skies. Tonight, lows dip down to about 76. I'm meteorologist Jennifer Wojcicki on News Radio WGNS. Currently 83.
WGNS is powered by Middle Tennessee Electric. Thanks to Sharing Change, MTE members are making a difference just by rounding up their monthly bills to support local nonprofits. See how it works at sharingchange.org.
This is the Roundtable from News Radio WGNS on FM 101.9 and AM 1450 Murfreesboro, FM 100.5 Smyrna. Listen and watch at WGNSradio.com.
Welcome back into the Roundtable here on WGNS. Chip Walters with you on this Wednesday. And glad to have Dr. John Weil, political science professor and the dean of the Honors College at MTSU. And we were talking about everything leading up to it, and in that one little period where they actually wrote the Declaration. Thomas Jefferson was the lead writer.
Yes.
And he had 4 others that were with him, and Benjamin Franklin was one of those. And it was kind of interesting because you said, Jefferson a little thin-skinned, but they got it all together. And I've seen a couple of, I don't know, I'm sure they were mock-ups because they weren't photos, obviously, of things that were,
yes,
where it was. And I don't know whether they kept those drafts or not, where things
Mr. Jefferson
had been crossed out, things like that.
He continued throughout most of his life to send copies of his declaration, which he thought was superior. But one of the, we talked about one of the ironies of proclaiming that all men are created equal and then owning slaves is the largest part that the Continental Congress struck out of the Declaration was the part that charged the king with bringing slaves to the United States. And it's
really?
like they realized that there was this, there was a little bit of hypocrisy in blaming him if you weren't going to free the slaves, which most of them had no intention to do.
Was that even an issue at the time?
It became an issue. I mean, it's certainly discussed at the Constitutional Convention, 1787. And in fact, George Mason, who was a large slave owner, gave one of the most persuasive speeches against slavery of anyone at the convention, but he didn't do much about it. Now, Mr. Washington, to his credit, who chaired the Constitutional Convention, did free his slaves, although he did it mostly, well, after he died, he did it in his will. And one of the fascinating things, I don't know if you've ever been to Philadelphia, but, you know, the Capitol was there during part of Washington's presidency, and they have the foundations of the house where he lived, and they have stories of the different people who lived there with him, including about 7 slaves. 2 of them, I believe, of which actually escaped while he was president, and he made attempts to recapture them.
Yeah.
But if you go to Philadelphia, now I don't know what it is today, but when I went 3 or 4 weeks ago, maybe a month or so ago, Trump had ordered all the information about the slaves to be taken down because he thought it reflected poorly on the United States. Well, it does, but it's part of our story. And so there were just this big sheets of white paper with people saying, this is outrageous, you know, why are we censoring history? And the court has since ruled against Mr. Trump on this, so I don't know if the panels are back or not.
So it's going to be interesting to see what it will be like in Philadelphia in particular. I'm sure there are going to be reenactments that will actually condense down because obviously, like you mentioned, the signing actually took them 6 months to sign everything, but I'm sure they'll probably reenact to where it's a little more dramatic.
You know, we've done one reading, and we're doing a second one on the campus at MTSU this year. We always do one on Constitution Day of the Constitution, but because summer schools are not quite as vibrant as the rest of the year, we haven't done it. But through our American Democracy Project, Dr. Sayward, we had a reading on Evacuation Day in Boston, which is a day that the British looked up and saw the cannon on Dorchester Heights and decided they needed to hightail it out of there. So we read it for that, and then we're going to read it again later this year.
In those first 2 major paragraphs before they get into in the first paragraph, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. So they say, in the course of human nature, we need to do this, and we're about to tell you why.
Right, and this sort of goes along with what we said earlier.
Yeah.
They had adopted the resolution on the 2nd. So the declaration, and there's 2 audiences for at least 2 for the declaration.
Yeah.
One is a domestic audience. So the Dunlop, which is the first printing of the Declaration, is sent to each of the state capitals, and then it's sent to Washington and other commanders. And they line their troops up, and then they read this Declaration to them. But the other audience is foreign, because when the resolution, Richard Henry Lee had introduced a resolution for independence in June, and when he did so, he introduced 2 other resolutions. One was for a confederation, which would ultimately become the Articles of Confederation and then the Constitution. And then the other resolution was a resolution to get foreign allies. And as a general rule, foreign governments don't intervene in civil wars. But if you're now saying it's no longer a civil war, we're a new people, we're our own nation, then you can get allies. And if it hadn't been for the Declaration of Independence, it's very unlikely that Mr. Franklin and Jefferson and others would have been able to persuade the French and the Spanish to intervene on our behalf.
Yeah, and who were the? I would imagine Ben Franklin had a lot to do with this, because the signers were very diverse geographically, economically, their backgrounds. You probably had farmers from Georgia and South Carolina, and then you have Alexander Hamilton and John Hancock on the other end of the spectrum.
You have a lot of lawyers, fair number of merchants.
Yeah.
But yes, they're from all now. The copy that we say usually says a unanimous Declaration of Independence. Unanimity was not achieved on the 4th. New York those delegates still did not have permission to declare independence, but within a week or so they were able to get that. So it was a unanimous vote of the states.
And we hear the phrase, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. In your view, how seriously did they take that? Because we talked about it immediately being an act of treason.
Yes. No, they took it very seriously.
Yeah.
And it's sort of the crossing of the Rubicon. Up to the Declaration of Independence, Britain had actually sent over a group to see if some kind of reconciliation could be made. And part of the problem was they would not recognize, when they came to negotiate, they refused initially at least to recognize George Washington as the commander of the troops. They simply called him Esquire. And he said, no, I'm not going to negotiate on uneven terms. You recognize who we are, or we can't even talk.
Yeah. And was there ever a time post signing and when it all started getting churned up, and when the British knew whose names were on there, were they ever, those 56 signers, did the British ever come looking for them to lock them up and take their land?
Yes. And in fact, if you mentioned this series on Mr. Jefferson, one of the interesting things is the time that he was governor, where he didn't realize immediately what the danger was, and then when he did, George Washington was off fighting somewhere else, but they actually came to his house at at Monticello, and he only escaped an hour or two before they got there. And if it hadn't been for Jack Jewett, who had ridden through the night to bring the news to him, he would have been captured for sure. John Witherspoon, who was
that documentary, I mean, he was literally within an hour of being caught.
Yes.
Yeah.
And John Witherspoon, who was the president of today's Princeton, it was in the College of New Jersey, he had two sons, one of whom was killed in the fighting and the other who was either missing for a while or actually captured. There were others whose houses were ransacked and the like. So, yes, they were. And in fact, Lexington and Concord, the fighting actually begins when the British are out to get John Hancock, and I forget who the other co-conspirator was, maybe Samuel Adams, but they were actually going to capture them and the magazine there, the firearms and the ammunition. So that they were marked men for sure.
Yeah, and obviously, you mentioned Thomas Jefferson, and with him, I guess word would eventually get back that he and Ben Franklin was kind of he was a lot of times the cooler head that prevailed for almost his entire life.
Yes.
Whether he was in France,
the sage on stage.
Okay,
yes.
yeah. So, and it's kind of interesting because he was probably the fatherly figure that helped them get through that, and like you mentioned, he was the probably the hand on the shoulder of Thomas Jefferson to keep him from walking out when people were wanting to make corrections to his writing.
And what's fascinating about Franklin, he had probably spent as much time in England as any of them. To my knowledge, the only original house that you can go to today where Benjamin Franklin lived is in London, where he was the representative of some of the colonies there.
Yeah.
And he had been, he was responsible for leaking letters from the royal governor of Massachusetts, which indicated that he really looked down on the colonists and was out to get them, if you will. And as a result, he had been humiliated in front of Parliament. He had to stand there while he was just questioned, and people were giving all these speeches. So when he originally came back to the United States, there were some people who thought, well, is he more for us or for them? But it was pretty clear that that he was on the Patriot side.
Yeah. Now, between July 4th or July 2nd, And I told you on the way up here that here we are on this screaming hot July 1st day.
Yes.
I looked up the weather conditions in Philadelphia for July 4th of 1776, and it was it was described as a very mild summer day with a temperature of 76 degrees. And the one who kept the records on the weather,
Mr. Jefferson,
was Mr. Jefferson.
He did through his entire life.
Yeah, he that's how they know what the weather was like that day. But anyway, is obviously July 4th is a declarative day. What was the lag time of them coming to an agreement and signing, and the word getting back to the king that, hey, the natives are restless?
It's about a month or so. Yeah. You know, it would be by ship. I'm just reading a book on this. It was just published. One of the mistakes that the Continental Congress made is they only sent one copy to Silas Deane, who was the American representative in France. And this copy was captured by the British on the way there. And Deane did not know about American independence until after they already knew about it in England and elsewhere. Oh. And he was so frustrated because he just, wasn't quite sure what to ask for or what to do.
Yeah, and he was left out in the dark.
Yes.
And as far as the physical copies, were they printed like on an offset press at that point? Or
well, it was a hand print. It was a Franklin press, or like the Franklin press.
Gotcha.
So, hand
so they
crank.
Could make multiple copies pretty easily.
They did, but it was one at a time. You didn't have the circular press like we had for newspapers later. But, MTSU, you probably know, has a replica of the Franklin press.
Yep.
And we've had one of the things that we did in the Honors College this year is we had a lecture series, and we took one of the classes over to see how this was done. And God bless the professor over there who did this. This typesetting is extremely complicated. Mm-hmm. You have to do it, piece by piece, and you got to get all the punctuation marks in there and the like. So it's a true act of love to work on that.
Absolutely. Dr. John Vial is our guest today. We're talking the Declaration of Independence as we count down to the 250th birthday party. We're going to party like it's 1776 right here on the Roundtable on WGNS.
When it comes to your child's health,
you want care that's close, convenient,
and centered around the needs of your family.
At MMC Pediatrics, we're more than just doctors.
We're partners in your parenting journey.
Here for every growth spurt,
for every boo-boo,
every fever, and every flu.
Our team approach means that your child always sees someone that knows them.
We are MMC Pediatrics.
We are right beside you
every step of the way.
First Shot transforms Rutherford County youth. Coach Andy Herzer leads dynamic basketball camps and clinics, building skills and character since 2003. Kids dive into exciting STEM projects, sparking creativity through hands-on coding, art, and dance. They elevate their mind, spirit, and body in summer and winter programs. Visit FirstShotTN.org today to learn more. First Shot, where kids gain, elevate, and develop.
When the weather turns bad, minutes, even seconds matter.
This is an early heads up for southern Rutherford County.
Rutherford Weather brings you live radar and expert meteorologist insight, giving you the early heads up when storms threaten.
A lot of areas are going to see some impacts from this storm.
From analysis to live camera views, we keep you informed before, during, and after the storm.
I think the vast majority of the hail with this now is going to be quarter to perhaps golf ball size.
Rutherford Weather. Stay ahead of the storm.
At Maples Realty and Auction, we handle traditional sales, auctions, and property management. And we have a development called The Maples with local builders and amenities. I'm Betsy Maples, and this is our team. It's our people. That's the difference. Call us today and let us help you get your property sold.
I refer a lot of clients to Maples Realty when we have real estate issues that are coming up. Working with Maples has been easy for me, easy for my clients.
Put our 57 years of success to work for you. Sold!
Hey folks, it's Chip Walters from Exit Realty Bob Lamb & Associates, helping Middle Tennessee make smart moves in a fast-moving market. Whether you're buying, selling, or just exploring your options, you deserve someone who knows this community and treats your goals like their own. From first-timers to long-time homeowners, I'm here to guide you with clarity, confidence, and a steady hand. When you're ready to make the next move, start with someone you trust. Visit choosechip.net and let's make your 2026 move the right move.
Premier 6 Theater on Broad in Jackson Heights.
Let's all go to the movies.
Check out what's showing at murfreesboromovies.com. Popcorn popped fresh daily.
Movies at the good old premises.
Premier 6 on Broad in Jackson Heights.
This is the Roundtable from News Radio WGNS on FM 101.9 and AM 1450 Murfreesboro, FM 100.5 Smyrna. Listen and watch at WGNSradio.com.
Welcome back into the Roundtable. Dr. John Weil is our guest today, and we're talking about the Declaration of Independence. And he has written a book on the Declaration. He has written a book on the signers of the Declaration of Independence. And I understand you're working on one now about presidential vetoes.
I actually have a book out on presidential vetoes. What I'm working on right now is a book tentatively called Inspiring and Healing Speeches. And I'm looking for speeches in American history where instead of trying to divide people, those in charge were trying to unite them. Lincoln was probably the best at this, but there was a bit of this during the Revolutionary conflict as well.
What is amazing is you, whether it's from, you read, what Thomas Jefferson wrote, he and the other writers of the group of five there that wrote that, and then you read these the letters of soldiers from the Civil War and how beautifully written they are, and and how now we can't even write a full sentence on a text message, and there's something missing there.
Well, and Mr. Washington is particularly interesting because he didn't have a college education, but his letters, and some of them I assume were probably written or ghostwritten by Alexander Hamilton or others, but very high degree of eloquence in his sentiments. He wrote a letter to a Jewish congregation shortly after becoming president, which we know has terms that he used frequently. So he referred to the children of Abraham and his hope that we would continue to have religious freedom and everybody could live under their own vine and fig tree. And I wish I could write that eloquently.
and even just to have the thought of those, to be able to think in a way to put it on paper as eloquently as they did. That's wild.
I don't know if it's the telephone or the computer who's messed us up.
and maybe there's they were able to focus,
right.
And we've got so much stuff going on around us now to distract us.
Well, if you just think about it, just the simple things like getting in a car and expecting to get someplace 50 miles within an hour or 70 miles. And at that time, if you wanted to go someplace, you had to get in a horse or a carriage. And there must have been a lot more times for reflection and conversation than we have today.
Well, as you've written about the Declaration and its meaning, how do you think that interpretation has evolved over 250 years?
Well, certainly we've come a lot closer to the notion of actually putting into practice the notion that all men are created equal. And as we had a private discussion, 1848, the Seneca Falls Convention, they issued this Declaration of Sentiments, which is based on the Declaration of Independence and says all men and women are created equal. And, of course, 14th Amendment, which was just in the news yesterday with the birthright citizenship case, this establishes that all persons, white or black, born in the United States are citizens of the United States. So we've come far there. We've been an inspiration to many countries. South America, we forget, was, all of them were colonies pretty much at the time of the American Revolution. To some extent, we had an influence on the French Revolution. That it eventually went off the tracks. One of the people in common, by the way, was General Lafayette.
Mm-hmm.
And, in 1824, Lafayette was invited back to the United States, and he took a tour that included coming to Nashville. He toured all of the existing states at the time. And, one of the most fascinating things about July 4th is on the Jubilee of the Declaration. So July 4th of 1826, Mr. Jefferson, who's been in bed for quite a few, he had been invited to give a speech for the 4th of July, and he writes in and says, "I'm sorry I can't be there, but here's what the Declaration means." And he says, "It means that no person is born with a saddle on their back to be ridden by somebody else." So he wakes up on July 4th, and he says, "Is it the 4th?" And he's assured that he is, and about 2 or 3 hours later, he passes away.
And didn't John Adams die the same day?
So John Adams is up in Massachusetts.
Right.
He wakes up, and he says, "Mr. Jefferson still lives," which he didn't. Jefferson had died several
Just
hours
hours
before.
earlier.
Right.
Wow.
And he dies. And then 5 years later, James Monroe, who was with George Washington crossing the Delaware to Trenton, he dies on that same day.
Yeah.
So many people, particularly 1826, now they would not have known it at the time, but, as news came in that both of these people had died, and of course, John Quincy Adams is president, so you had the son of a president announcing to the world that his father and Mr. Jefferson have died on the same day. And many people considered this a kind of providential sign. This is God nodding in our direction, telling us that He's blessed our work.
Wow. And you're right. There's something mystical about that.
Yes.
That just can't be a coincidence that those two guys died on the same day.
They tried to. What's interesting is James Madison, 5 years after Monroe, toward the end of June, his doctor says, "You're fading fast. Would you like me to juice you up here a little to keep you alive?" And he said, "No, don't worry about it." Wow. So he died a little before the 4th. But we've had some great celebrations of the 4th. 1876 was probably one of the biggest ones. And if people are able to go down to Cannonsburg, we have a building there in which I have displays from each of the celebrations. And the prints from this era are particularly noteworthy. And they tend to stress unity, which, of course, it's right 11 years from the end of the Civil War. The other thing they focus on is progress. And one of the fascinating stories about the centennial is one of the things that was trotted out at the exposition was the telephone. It's the first public display of the telephone.
1876.
Yeah, 1876.
So we're talking the telephone's been around now 150 years.
Yes, and what's fascinating is they have these editorials from the New York newspapers saying, Alexander Graham Bell was there, and he showed us this instrument, and it's quite a novelty, but it's hard to imagine that it would ever serve any useful purpose.
and now it runs our lives.
And then, by the way, in 1926, the
150th.
Yes, 150th anniversary, there's a major fight, Jack Dempsey and Toomey, in which Dempsey utters the famous words, "Honey, I forgot to duck." And then, of course, the bicentennial,
which was huge,
which was huge, also in Philadelphia. There was a copy of the Magna Carta that Ross Perot had bought and was on display there. But a lot of people,
President Ford should get a lot of credit for that.
He should.
Yes,
and he gave like 4 or 5 successive speeches for that.
Mm-hmm.
What's fascinating is that some people were calling it the BUY Centennial because there was so much merchandising that was done in connection with the Declaration. And
well, we could have said you ain't seen nothing yet.
Well, we especially when it comes to cage fighting, right, from 1926.
Jack Dempsey would be shaking his head, too. Okay, if Jefferson, Adams, or Franklin could see the modern United States, in your opinion, what part of the Declaration would they be proudest of, and what might trouble them?
Well, I think they would be pleased to know that we've had,
we're still around.
We're still around, and we still have, government is based on the consent of the governed. We still have free elections. I think they would, particularly Mr. Jefferson and Mr. Franklin, would be utterly amazed by the scientific progress. I mean, they were both, they love to invent. They love to see new inventions and bring them to their house. I think they would do that. I think many of them might be concerned about the level of civic education. That we seem sometimes to emphasize everything but, what are the founding principles? How does our government work? And I think
civics was one of my favorite classes in junior high and high school, and now it's not even around.
It seems to have changed. The best courses that I ever had, probably aside maybe from a seminar I had at Princeton one summer, were my 4th and 7th grade history classes in Virginia. Virginia claimed, many of the patriots, of course, came from there, including Washington, Jefferson, and Madison. But I love those books, and they had a permanent influence on me.
After all your years of studying the Declaration of Independence, what parts still move you the most?
Well, again, I think the beginning and the end. The notion that I think that the primary distinction that Mr. Jefferson and others were trying to make is prior to the Declaration, particularly in England. England was a relatively free country, but the rights that the people exercised were considered to be gifts from the sovereign. You have these rights because King George gives them to you, whereas Jefferson is saying, no, as human beings, we all have equal worth and dignity. We're all entitled to life, liberty, and then, of course, the pursuit of happiness.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting distinction because, and I think that's where, when you boil it down, is the signers. They were saying that these are God-given rights, not king-given rights.
That's right. But there was there's also the very famous line that Mr. Franklin uttered to the wife of the mayor of Philadelphia at the end of the convention, which is, do we have a republic or a monarchy? And his response was, we have a republic if you can keep it. And the founders, placed great emphasis, of course, Mr. Jefferson founded the University of Virginia in part because, he believed that for Republican government to survive, you needed people who understood the principles.
Mm-hmm. Now, in your books about the Declaration and the book about the signers, what do you hope readers take away from those books the most?
Well, I think there was a genuine sense of public spiritedness among the framers that, they were interested in fame. And when we think of fame today, we think of popularity. How many hits do you have? How many followers you have? But when they thought about fame, they thought about what legacy are you leaving behind for the future? When people look at you, are you going to be one who has, worked for the rights of the people, or are you going to be one who's thought only of yourself?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as we lead up to this date of on Saturday of the 4th, does it? What? I'm interested in someone who has studied this so much. Of what kind of feelings does it conjure up in you?
Well, I'm very proud to be an American. I think most people are. Again, if you look at without getting too particular, if you look at some of the things that Mr. Jefferson accused the king of doing, I think sometimes we look at our government and say, well, are they doing the same thing today?
Yeah.
So, it's sort of like reading the Bible. You can never read it too many times, or you're never going to understand it all. But as citizens, that's one of our tasks.
Yeah. If you could turn the tables and have Thomas Jefferson sitting across the table from you, what would you want to know from him?
Oh my goodness!
What questions would you be asking him about?
I would be so intimidated. I don't know that I could do it. I think rather than ask him something, is I would want to let him know that the vision still continues, that people are still, they're still reading his works, and doing their best to apply them.
Do you find that vision is still there with your students in the Honors College?
Oh yeah, we have great students, and they are, they're committed to doing well for themselves, but they're also committed to being good citizens of the university, citizens of Tennessee, and citizens of the United States.
Yeah, I tell you, this has been fantastic.
I've enjoyed it.
I was really, as like I said, it was Providence that it worked out that we could come in on this day, July 1st, to talk about what happened 250 years ago. And I really appreciate you taking time and let's get together again and go down a few more rabbit holes.
Let's do it. Constitution Week's coming up in September. So.
There you go. All right. Dr. John Vial has joined us today. If you missed any of this, the link to the podcast will be up very shortly, and it'll be certainly worth your listen. Be sure to try to stay cool today. It is a hot one, and Brian Barrett will tell you all about that coming up next here on the Big G, WGNS.